The city exhaled a cold, damp breath that clung to everything it touched. At a lonely bus stop, illuminated by the sickly orange glow of a single street lamp, Chloe huddled deeper into her threadbare coat, the fabric offering little defense against the biting November wind. The rhythmic hiss of tires on wet asphalt was the only sound, a constant reminder of the world moving on without her. Her shift at the diner had been long, her feet ached, and the thought of the overdue rent notice taped to her refrigerator was a heavy stone in her stomach. She was just one of countless shadows in a metropolis that never slept but rarely dreamed, a single mother fighting a silent, exhausting war against a tide of bills and responsibilities, waiting for a bus that felt like a metaphor for hope, always late and never guaranteed. As she shifted her weight, a glint of dark leather caught her eye, nestled beneath the cold metal bench. It was a man's wallet, thick and imposing, looking profoundly out of place in this forgotten corner of the city. For a moment, she considered leaving it, her own problems too immense to take on anyone else's. Yet, a quiet but persistent nudge from her conscience urged her to reach for it. Her fingers, numb with cold, closed around the surprisingly heavy object. It felt expensive, solid, a relic from a world far removed from her own. With a quick, nervous glance around the empty street, she unfastened the clasp. The sight that greeted her stole the air from her lungs, a stack of crisp, clean $100 bills, more money than she had seen in years. A dizzying wave of possibility and panic washed over her. That money was a solution. It was the rent paid for 3 months. It was new shoes for her son, Leo, whose current pair had a hole that let the rain in. It was a full pantry, a moment of peace. A single night of sleep, uninterrupted by the gnawing anxiety of debt. The city's indifference suddenly felt like an invitation. Who would ever know? The temptation was a physical thing, a sharp, desperate ache in her chest that argued with a lifetime of lessons about right and wrong. For one long, agonizing second, under the flickering street lamp, Chloe saw an easier path, a shortcut out of the crushing weight that defined her existence. It was a silent, desperate plea from the part of her that was just so tired of fighting. But then, the image of Leo's face, his bright, trusting eyes looking up at her, cut through the fog of desperation. She remembered the stories she'd read him about brave knights and honest heroes, the lessons she tried to teach him about integrity being the one treasure no one could ever take from you. How could she face him in the morning, knowing she had become the villain in her own story? Her resolve hardened. With newfound purpose, her fingers bypassed the cash, searching for a sign of the person this wallet belonged to. Tucked away in a worn sleeve was a single, elegant business card, its text slightly faded. It simply read, Alistair, followed by an address in a part of town known for its quiet, tree-lined streets and stately old homes. The distant rumble of her approaching bus grew louder, its headlights cutting through the misty darkness. It was her ride home, her escape from the cold, her path back to her son. Yet Chloe stood perfectly still, the wallet feeling heavier than ever in her hand. As the bus slowed, its doors hissing open in an invitation, she made a choice that defied all logic and every ounce of her own self-interest. She let the bus pull away without her, its red taillights disappearing into the night like a closing door. Turning her back on the familiar route home, she started walking in the opposite direction, toward an unknown address and an unknown man. She didn't know it then, but she wasn't just returning a wallet. She was walking directly toward her own destiny, a future that was about to be rewritten by a single act of impossible honesty. The walk was longer and colder than she could have imagined, a pilgrimage of conscience through sleeping neighborhoods that grew quieter and more opulent with every block. The city's harsh, unforgiving concrete gave way to manicured lawns shrouded in mist, and the angry orange of streetlights was replaced by the soft, golden glow from tall, stately windows. Chloe's feet, already aching from a full day of standing, protested with every step, a dull throb that echoed the beat of her own anxious heart. She felt like an intruder in this silent world of wealth and privilege. Her worn coat and tired posture, a stark contrast to the elegant architecture that lined the streets. The sacrifice of her bus ride home, of warmth and rest, felt immense, a price paid on faith alone, for a principle that felt increasingly foolish and naive as the chilling wind cut through her clothes and exhaustion settled deep into her bones. As she finally located the address from the business card, a sprawling stone house set back from the road behind a wrought-iron fence, a wave of profound intimidation washed over her. This wasn't just a home. It was a fortress, a world away from her cramped two-bedroom apartment. The sheer scale of it made her feel small, insignificant, and a new fear began to bloom in her chest, colder than the night air. What if the owner didn't believe her? What if he accused her of taking something, of being a common thief who got scared and changed her mind? The powerful so often saw the worst in the powerless. She could be dismissed, humiliated, or even reported to the police. The wallet, once a symbol of her integrity, now felt like a piece of damning evidence, and the simple act of returning it suddenly seemed fraught with unspoken risks that threatened more than just her pride. Taking a deep, shaky breath that clouded in front of her face, Chloe pushed open the heavy iron gate, its hinges groaning in protest, the sound echoing in the unnerving stillness of the night. She walked up the stone path, each step feeling heavier than the last, her gaze fixed on the imposing oak door. A single light burned in an upstairs window, a lonely beacon in the vast darkness of the house. For a final, fleeting moment, she considered just leaving the wallet on the doorstep, a silent, anonymous act of good. But the thought of Leo, of showing him that courage meant facing your fears head-on, propelled her forward. Her trembling hand reached out and lifted the heavy brass knocker, shaped like a lion's head. She let it fall once, the sharp, definitive sound cutting through the silence, announcing her presence to the sleeping giant of a house. The door creaked open, revealing a man bathed in the dim, warm light from the hallway behind him. He was older, with silver hair that was slightly disheveled, and eyes that held a profound, hollowed-out sadness. He wasn't angry or alarmed, just weary, as if her knock had pulled him from a deep, sorrowful trance. Chloe's carefully rehearsed words tumbled out in a nervous rush as she held out the wallet. "Excuse me, sir. I found this at the bus stop on Elm Street. I think it might be yours." He looked from her face to the wallet in her hand, his expression unreadable. He took it without a word, his fingers brushing against hers for a brief, cold second. He checked inside, his movements slow and methodical, before looking back at her. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet and raspy, barely more than a whisper, devoid of any real warmth or relief. Before Chloe could even respond, the heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving her alone on the stone steps, enveloped once more by the biting cold and the profound silence. The finality of that sound was like a physical blow. A deep, hollow feeling of anticlimax settled in her stomach. She had walked across town, battled her own desperation, faced down her fear of judgment, all for a thank you that felt as empty as the street around her. There was no relief, no shared moment of humanity, just a swift and silent dismissal. As she turned and began the long, lonely walk back toward a world that felt 1,000,000 miles away, a crushing doubt began to set in. In her effort to do the right thing, had she simply proven how little such gestures mattered in a world that had already made up its mind about people like her? Several days bled into a familiar, monotonous rhythm, each one a testament to the quiet grind of Chloe's life. The memory of the cold stone steps and the wealthy man's dismissive thanks had faded, filed away as just another one of the city's small, sharp disappointments. She was back in her element at the bustling Morning Glory diner, a world filled with the comforting clatter of ceramic plates, the rich, earthy aroma of brewing coffee and the low hum of conversations. Here she moved with an efficient grace, refilling mugs and scribbling down orders, the warmth of the diner a welcome shield against the persistent chill outside. It was during a momentary lull in the lunch rush that the small bell above the door chimed, and a figure stepped inside, bringing the cold with him. It was Alistair, looking profoundly out of place in his tailored overcoat amidst the worn vinyl booths and checkered floors. He stood near the entrance for a moment, his eyes scanning the room until they found her. He looked different in the bright, unforgiving light of the diner. The deep sadness in his eyes was still there, but it was now accompanied by a clear, unmistakable flicker of purpose. He walked slowly toward the counter where she was wiping down a spill, his presence drawing a few curious glances from the regulars. Chloe's heart gave a nervous flutter. She expected him to be formal, perhaps to offer her a small reward and be on his way. Instead, he simply waited until she looked up, his expression one of quiet, earnest apology. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice softer and warmer than she remembered. "I was not myself the other night. You showed me a kindness I had forgotten existed, and I was rude. May I sit for a moment?" Chloe, taken aback by his sincerity, gestured to an empty booth in the corner, its red vinyl cracked with age. She poured him a cup of coffee, her hands moving on autopilot as her mind raced to catch up. He watched her, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "You didn't have to return it," he said, his gaze steady and searching. "No one would have known. I have to ask, why did you?" The question was simple, but it held the weight of his entire worldview. Chloe paused, thinking of Leo's trusting face and the stories they read together at night. "I have a son," she answered, her voice soft but firm. "I want him to grow up knowing that who you are when no one is watching is what matters most. That money, it wouldn't have been worth the lesson I'd be teaching him if I kept it." Alistair looked down into his coffee cup, swirling the dark liquid as if searching for an answer in its depths. A profound silence settled between them, a small island of stillness in the noisy diner. "My wife, Eleanor," he said, the name spoken with a mixture of reverence and pain. "She believed that she saw goodness everywhere, even when I couldn't." He looked up, and for the first time, Chloe saw past the wall of wealth and grief, glimpsing the man underneath, a man hollowed out by loss. "I've spent the last 2 years in a world that felt colorless. After she passed, the light just went out. I've been testing a theory, you see, a rather cynical one about human nature." He didn't elaborate, leaving a void of unspoken meaning hanging in the air between them. Before she could ask what he meant, a call for an order from the kitchen broke the spell. Alistair took it as his cue to leave. He stood, placing a crisp $100 bill on the table, far more than enough to cover the coffee. "Please," he said, gently pushing it toward her when she started to protest. "This isn't a reward. It's a thank you for the coffee and for the conversation." He walked toward the door but stopped with his hand on the handle, turning back to look at her one last time. "Your son is very lucky to have you, Chloe. You reminded me of someone I thought I had lost forever." He left without another word, leaving Chloe standing by the booth, the warmth of the coffee cup in her hands, a stark contrast to the sudden, chilling question that bloomed in her mind. What exactly had he been testing? Alistair returned to the cavernous silence of his home, the lingering scent of diner coffee clinging to his coat like a ghost of warmth and life. The grand foyer, once filled with the echo of his wife Eleanor's laughter, now felt like a pristine, cold museum dedicated to her memory. Every polished surface reflected a distorted, lonely version of himself, a man adrift in a sea of possessions that had lost all meaning. He walked into the library, the air thick with the scent of old paper and leather, and stopped before a large, silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was Eleanor, her eyes bright with a fierce, unyielding optimism that he had once found both enchanting and naive. Her smile seemed to question him now, to challenge the bitter man he had become in her absence. He sank into a deep leather armchair, the weight of his cynicism pressing down on him heavier than ever before. He closed his eyes, and the memory of her rushed in, as vivid and painful as the day she left. Eleanor had been a force of nature, a woman who believed that kindness was a currency more valuable than any fortune. Her final passion project had been the Second Bloom Foundation, an organization she built from the ground up to support single mothers facing overwhelming odds. She poured her heart and soul into it, personally reviewing cases, offering not just financial aid but mentorship and genuine compassion. Alistair had admired her spirit, but privately worried about her vulnerability, her tendency to trust too readily. He saw the world in shades of grey, while Eleanor saw only the potential for light. She often told him, "Every person deserves the dignity of being believed in, Alistair. That belief is what helps them bloom again." It was her life's defining philosophy. The bloom had withered into a devastating blight. Shortly after her sudden passing from an aggressive illness, Alistair, while settling her affairs, uncovered a deep and sickening betrayal. The Foundation's most trusted director, a woman Eleanor had championed and treated like a daughter, had been systematically embezzling funds for years. The fraud was meticulously hidden, a calculated act of cruelty that preyed on Eleanor's unwavering faith in her. For Alistair, the discovery was a second death. It wasn't the loss of the money that broke him, but the violent desecration of his wife's most sacred belief. It confirmed his darkest fears about humanity and painted her beautiful, compassionate legacy with the ugly stain of deceit. The world, it seemed, had proven him right in the most brutal way imaginable, turning her life's work into a monument of her own perceived foolishness. That poison seeped into his soul, calcifying his grief into a hard, impenetrable shell of bitterness. He dissolved the Foundation, unable to look at its name without feeling the sting of betrayal. He retreated from society, locking himself away in the gilded cage of his home, convinced that everyone was driven by a core of selfish opportunism. This belief festered until it became an obsession, birthing a cruel and private experiment. For months, he had been leaving his wallet in places where the city's most desperate souls might find it, a baited trap designed to prove his grim thesis. Each time it was returned empty or not at all, it was another piece of evidence, another brick in the wall around his heart. Chloe was never meant to be a beacon of hope. She was meant to be his final, definitive proof that goodness was a myth. Now, sitting in the dark library, the memory of Chloe's honest eyes burned through his self-imposed darkness. Her simple integrity had not just returned his wallet, it had exposed the profound ugliness of his test. A wave of shame washed over him, so potent it left him breathless. He had been dishonoring Eleanor, using his grief as a weapon against the very world she had so desperately tried to heal. He knew then that a simple thank you was not enough. He had to resurrect her legacy, to rebuild the Foundation not in spite of the betrayal, but as a testament to the one person who proved him wrong. He would find Chloe and offer her a new beginning. But what he didn't know was that the connection between his late wife and the struggling waitress ran far deeper than a simple act of kindness. A few days later, a call came to the diner during a quiet afternoon lull. It was Alistair. His voice, stripped of its former weariness, was now clear and imbued with a gentle but firm sense of purpose. He didn't offer many details, only a simple intriguing request for Chloe to meet him at an address in the city's old financial district. He assured her it was not an imposition, but an opportunity, something vital concerning her future and the well-being of her son. A strange current of apprehension and hope coursed through her. Trusting the newfound sincerity in his tone, she agreed without hesitation. After arranging for her neighbor to watch Leo, she left her small, familiar world behind, walking toward a destiny that felt both terrifying and preordained. her heart pounding with the rhythm of a life about to change. The address led her to a stately, handsome building, its stone facade hinting at a grander, forgotten era. Alistair was waiting for her on the steps, his posture straight and his expression unreadable but calm. He led her through ornate brass doors into a lobby that echoed with silence. They rode an old, caged elevator upwards, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken words. He unlocked a door and guided her into a large suite of offices where time itself seemed to have stopped. Dust motes drifted lazily in the shafts of fading sunlight that pierced through the tall, grimy windows. Most of the furniture was draped in white cloths, resembling a landscape of silent, sleeping ghosts. The profound stillness of the place was unnerving, a silent testament to a vibrant life that had been abruptly paused. He guided her past the shrouded desks to one that remained uncovered, a magnificent mahogany island in a sea of white. Upon its polished surface lay a single, unassuming manila folder. Chloe's eyes fell upon the tab, and the air froze in her lungs. Written there in a graceful, flowing script was her own name, Chloe Vance. A wave of dizzying confusion washed over her. How? Why? Alistair gently opened the folder, revealing its contents. Inside were the very documents she had painstakingly compiled months ago. Her desperate application for financial aid, copies of her mounting bills, the tear-stained letter explaining her plight. It was her submission to the Second Bloom Foundation, the one that had been answered with a cold, impersonal rejection that had felt like the final nail in her coffin. My wife, Eleanor, this was her life's work, Alistair said, his voice echoing softly in the vast, empty room. She founded this organization to help women just like you. She insisted on reading every application herself, believing she could feel a person's spirit through their words. He carefully tapped a small, yellowed sticky note affixed to the top page. The handwriting was delicate, the ink a faded shade of blue. It read, "Incredible strength here. A true fighter. We must help her bloom again. Schedule personal follow-up." Alistair's gaze, heavy with the weight of memory, met hers. Eleanor wrote this the day before she was hospitalized for the last time. Your file was on her desk when she left. The woman who took over after, she never made the call. The world tilted, the floor seeming to fall away beneath Chloe's feet. Every sound in the city outside faded into a dull, distant roar. That rejection letter, a symbol of her failure and invisibility, was not the truth. It was a lie, a betrayal of a promise made by a woman she had never met. Her struggle, her quiet desperation, her fierce hope for her son. It had all been seen. A guardian angel she never knew existed had read her story, had recognized her fight, and had chosen her. The lost wallet was not a random test of morality from a cynical widower. It was a cosmic echo, a fateful, impossible closing of a circle that had been drawn long ago. She was not just a stranger who performed an act of kindness. She was the last wish of a woman whose legacy she had just helped resurrect. A sharp, cold clarity pierced through the initial shock, and Chloe took an involuntary step back, away from the desk, away from the file that bore her name like a brand. This revelation was not a gift. It felt like an indictment. The story of Eleanor's kindness, so beautiful and pure in its telling, was now irrevocably tangled with the ugly reality of Alistair's cynical experiment. She had not been a fellow human being returning a lost item. She had been a test subject, the final data point in his grim study of human decency. The silent, dust-filled office no longer felt like a place of dormant dreams, but like a laboratory where her life had been dissected without her consent. Her act of integrity, A choice made from the deepest part of her soul now felt cheapened, reduced to a variable in a rich man's painful equation. The very air grew thin, heavy with the weight of this new, humiliating truth. Alistair saw the shift in her immediately. The soft hope that had briefly illuminated her features was extinguished, replaced by a shield of ice. Her eyes, which had held a flicker of wonder just moments before, were now distant and guarded. He opened his mouth to explain, to bridge the sudden, cavernous gap that had opened between them. But the words caught in his throat. He had envisioned this moment as a beautiful, cinematic unveiling of destiny, a joining of two disparate lives by his wife's benevolent spirit. Instead, he had managed to make her feel small, like a project to be managed rather than a person to be honored. The power dynamic, which her honesty had briefly leveled, was back with a vengeance, casting him as the wealthy benefactor and her as the unwitting recipient of a fate she never asked to be a part of. He had intended to give her dignity and had instead stolen it away. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence with the precision of a shard of glass. "So, you didn't just lose your wallet," she stated, not as a question, but as an accusation. "You were leaving it for people like me, to see what we would do." She looked at him then, and the disillusionment in her gaze was a physical blow. "Was I just the one who finally passed your test? Was my honesty just interesting to you?" The profound injustice of it all settled in her chest, a cold, heavy stone. She had walked miles in the freezing cold, sacrificing her own comfort and peace of mind, not for a fellow soul in need, but for a man who was using his wealth and grief to play a cruel game with the desperate. The gesture was no longer hers. It had been co-opted into his narrative of loss and redemption. Stunned by the force of her quiet fury, Alistair struggled to defend himself. "No, Chloe, that's not how it was. I swear to you, I had no idea who you were. I didn't know about this file until after you left my house that night. It was fate. A coincidence I couldn't ignore." But his explanation sounded weak and hollow, even to his own ears. He saw in that moment how his actions, born from a place of profound pain, looked from the outside, arrogant, condescending, and manipulative. He had been so consumed by his own cynical worldview that he never considered the perspective of the people he was testing. He had wanted to find proof of goodness, but in doing so, he had treated a good person like a specimen, forgetting the fierce pride that so often accompanies true integrity. He had misjudged her completely. Without another word, Chloe turned and walked toward the door, her posture radiating a quiet, unshakable dignity that made his grand office feel small and insignificant. Her steps were not rushed or angry, but deliberate and final, each one a silent rejection of him, his money, and his complicated, painful story. She pulled the heavy door open and stepped out, closing it gently behind her, the soft click echoing the sound of the door he had shut on her just nights before. Alistair was left standing alone in the tomb of his wife's legacy, the open folder on the desk a testament to both Eleanor's faith and his own profound failure to honor it. He had found the one person who could resurrect his hope, only to shatter her with the clumsy, prideful weight of his truth. The chasm between them felt immense, perhaps too wide to ever be crossed. The silence Alistair had cultivated for 2 years suddenly became his tormentor, amplifying the soft click of the closing door into a deafening verdict of his failure. He stood motionless in the dusty office, the file containing his wife's last wish lying open like an open wound on the desk. A profound shame, colder and heavier than any grief he had known, settled over him. He had sought to prove the world was corrupt, but in the process, he had become the very thing he despised, a man who used power and position to manipulate the vulnerable. He saw with excruciating clarity that Chloe's integrity wasn't a data point to be collected. It was a living, breathing force that he had insulted. He had dishonored not only her, but Eleanor, whose entire life was a testament to seeing the person, not the circumstance. In that moment, he knew a simple apology would never be enough. He had to dismantle the cynical fortress he'd built around his heart and prove, through action, that he was worthy of the lesson Chloe had taught him. Chloe walked away from the grand stone building, not with anger, but with a hollow ache that seemed to absorb all the noise and color from the city around her. The brief, beautiful feeling of being seen, of being chosen by a kind stranger from the past, had been violently ripped away, replaced by the humiliating sting of being judged. Her act of honesty, a private victory of character over desperation, now felt like a performance for an unseen, critical audience. It felt tainted. As she blended back into the anonymous crowds, she felt more invisible than ever before. The world had once again confirmed its indifference. The right choice had led her not to a miracle, but to a painful reminder of the chasm between her world and his, a chasm built of suspicion and power. She pulled her thin coat tighter, a futile gesture against a chill that was coming not from the air, but from deep within her own disillusioned spirit. The next afternoon, Alistair walked into the Morning Glory diner. The bell above the door chimed, the sound familiar yet entirely different from his last visit. He didn't approach the counter or seek Chloe out. Instead, he quietly took a seat in the same corner booth, the one with the cracked red vinyl, and he waited. He didn't order coffee or look at a menu. He simply sat, a silent, patient vigil in the midst of the diner's chaotic symphony. He watched Chloe move through the lunch rush, her movements efficient and graceful, her expression a careful mask of professionalism that betrayed nothing of her inner turmoil. For hours he remained, a still point in her swirling world, his presence a quiet, public admission of his fault. He was no longer the powerful man summoning her to his domain. He was a supplicant, waiting humbly in hers, offering his time as the first down payment on his apology. As the diner emptied and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, Chloe finally approached his table, her arms crossed, her eyes wary. Before she could speak, Alistair looked up at her, his own eyes stripped of all pride. "I was wrong. Chloe," he began, his voice low and sincere, resonating with a truth that was undeniable. "I was so lost in my own pain that I made the world a darker place to match it. What you did, it wasn't for me. It was for you. It was for your son. It was an act of profound character, and I cheapened it with my cynicism. You weren't a test I was running on the world. You were a lesson the world was teaching me. You were the answer to a question my wife always knew, and that I had forgotten how to ask. I am so deeply, truly sorry for making you feel like anything less than the remarkable person you are." He slid a new folder across the table, different from the one in his office. Inside were incorporation documents, a business plan. "I am reopening the foundation," he explained, his voice steady with newfound purpose. "But I can't do it alone. I need a conscience. I need someone who understands what it means to choose hope when everything is hopeless." He looked at her, his offer not one of charity, but of profound respect. "I'm not offering you a job, Chloe. I'm asking you to be my partner. I want you to sit on the board of directors, to be the voice that ensures we never lose sight of the people we are meant to serve, to help us find others who need to bloom again." Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, but they were not tears of hurt or anger. They were tears of recognition. In his offer, she didn't just see a new future. She saw her own worth, finally, truly, being seen. The city no longer felt like an adversary. The morning sun, once a distant, cold observer, now streamed warmly through the tall windows of the Second Bloom Foundation, illuminating the vibrant space with a hopeful golden light. Chloe sat at the large mahogany desk, not as a visitor, but as its rightful occupant, a gentle authority in her posture that had been forged in hardship and integrity. Across from her, her son Leo sat at a small table, a colourful drawing of a superhero who bore a striking resemblance to his mother, taking shape under his focused crayon. The worn-out shoes with the hole were a distant memory, replaced by sturdy new ones that never let the rain in. Her life was no longer a frantic race from one overdue bill to the next. It was a steady, purposeful walk toward a future she was actively building, not just for her family, but for countless others she had yet to meet. Alistair was a man reborn, the heavy shroud of grief and cynicism lifted to reveal the compassionate soul Eleanor had always loved. He no longer saw the world through the distorted lens of betrayal, but through the clear, honest perspective that Chloe brought to their shared work. He would often watch her as she reviewed applications, her brow furrowed in concentration, her comments always focused on the person behind the paper, the strength hidden within their story of struggle. He had learned to listen again, not just to words, but to the unspoken hopes and fears of the women they served. Their partnership was a quiet, respectful dance of two once-broken souls, healing each other, building a legacy of kindness that was stronger and more resilient than ever before, a true testament to the woman who had unknowingly brought them together. It is a profound truth of the universe that sometimes the right choice is an investment in a destiny you can't yet see. Chloe's long, cold walk to return a lost wallet was not a detour from her path. It was the path itself, a pilgrimage that tested her character and ultimately led her home. That single act of impossible honesty, performed in the lonely darkness with no expectation of reward, was a seed of integrity planted in frozen ground. From it, a forest of opportunities had grown, offering shelter and hope, not only to her, but to all the lives the foundation would now touch. Her story serves as a quiet, powerful reminder that our true wealth is not measured by what we have, but by the integrity we refuse to surrender, even when we feel we have nothing left to lose. Looking out from the office window, Chloe could see the endless river of humanity flowing through the city streets below. She no longer saw an indifferent crowd, but a collection of individual stories, each with its own silent battles and hidden strengths. She understood now that every person carries the potential for immense goodness, a capacity to change the world with a single, selfless gesture. Her journey had taught her that empathy is not a passive feeling, but an active choice, a decision to see the humanity in another and to act on that recognition, regardless of the personal cost. The world can often feel cold and transactional, but every so often, a choice is made that reminds us of the powerful, invisible threads that connect us all, weaving a grander narrative of fate and compassion. As the day came to a close, Chloe walked out into the soft evening light, her hand held firmly in Leo's. Alistair stood at the window above, watching them go, a genuine, peaceful smile gracing his features as he saw not just a family, but the living embodiment of his renewed faith. The city lights began to twinkle on, no longer appearing harsh or menacing, but like a constellation of earthbound stars, each one a potential spark of hope. If this story, a testament to how one small act of integrity can rewrite a future, has resonated with you, consider sharing its light with others. For in a world that often tests our resolve, a simple story can be the reminder someone needs that their choices matter, and that goodness, however small, always finds its way back home.